What if the place meant to keep you safe for the night was already occupied by something that knew your name, your voice, and the precise rhythm of your heartbeat? Welcome back to Whispering Abyss. Tonight, we have something truly haunting for you. From rooms that answer your knock to managers who repeat words they never said, every motel on this road trip keeps a secret behind thin drywall and humming ice machines. From eerie voices in the vents to footsteps that stop just outside your door, each story is a mystery waiting to unfold. Which one will creep you out the most? Tell me in the comments when your lights are still on. Story 1. Room 217 knocks back. I only realized the knocking was answering me when it spelled my last name on the wall, one slow tap at a time, as if the room already knew I would never leave. And that was the first moment I wondered if you could check out while something checks in, right behind your ribs. I had pulled off the highway because the rain turned to sleet and the wipers began to stutter like a nervous pulse. The motel's neon hissed vacancy in a puddle, broken letters swimming red. I told myself I would grab 5 hours before the morning drive to a job I could not afford to blow. The sign on the office door jingled once, and the air smelled like old cleaner and cold coffee, which felt safe enough if I kept moving. The clerk was a pale man with a thrift store tie and a smile that did not move past his lips. He slid a brass key across the counter, not a card, and said room 217, which has a good heater. He added that the closet in that room sticks, so do not force it. Half joking, I asked what was in there. He said storage. I said fine. He hesitated like the word had more weight than it should, and I pretended not to notice because I needed the night. My name is Carter, and I have a talent for choosing battles that quietly choose me back. I was already planning how to word my apology if I slept past the interview, how to make it sound honest. No calls tonight, no text to my ex, no explanations to my brother about borrowing his car. I wanted a window and a ceiling and sleep, and I think the room wanted something else entirely. The hallway to 217 was cooler than the lobby, as if the vent over my head blew winter itself. The carpet had a pattern of little diamonds, a faded heartbeat from door to door. I heard a soft, dripping sound, somewhere distant, like a faucet closed almost tight. When I stepped into 217, the air dipped colder by a few degrees, just enough to lift the hair on my arms, and the sound of water vanished, which should have soothed me, but did not. Inside, the room held that old motel smell of dust baked by heaters and something citrus that tried to hide it. The alarm clock on the nightstand blinked 317 in red, plugged into nothing. The cord lay coiled like a sleeping snake, and the outlet was bare. I told myself it had a battery. The bathroom tap squeaked but ran clear. The heater rattled like coins in a jar, then warmed the air. The closet door to the right of the dresser had a tarnished knob and a keyhole with no key. There was a guest book on the dresser, which felt like an odd touch. People had written dates and notes like safe and clean or the ice machine is loud. Near the bottom of the last page, someone had scrawled a name I did not know in a tight hand, with room 217 next to it and no checkout date. Instead, under the date column it said still here, and the ink had bled as if the pen had paused too long, which felt like a joke until the heater stuttered and the closet door clicked, very lightly like a throat clearing itself. I started to unpack, which in a motel means I moved my bag onto the chair and left it zipped. The knocking came as a soft, hollow tap from inside the closet, like a nail against wood. 2 taps, a pause, then 1. I froze with my toothbrush in my hand, listening. Pipes, I thought. Sometimes water hammers in old buildings. I tapped the wall once with my knuckle to map a stud, and after a beat, the same soft would sound tapped back from the closet, the timing too neat to be random, which made my mouth go dry. I told myself there's probably a maintenance shaft behind that closet, maybe an old service space. The dripping sound returned, slow and patient, and I checked the bathroom again. Dry. I pressed my palm to the closet door and felt a thread of cold seeping through the wood, like air moving where there should be none. The knob resisted when I tried it, and the wood creaked softly as if leaning into my hand, which made me picture something leaning back against it on the other side. I knocked 3 times, quick and joking, and then I stood there and felt like I had to send a text to a number I did not recognize. The reply came as 2 taps, a pause, then two matched my rhythm, like it had listened and adjusted. I stepped back hard enough to bump the chair. The unplugged clock on the nightstand clicked in my ear, numbers frozen at 3:17 like a stuck heartbeat, and I told myself I was overtired, which was true, but never the whole truth. Is it? I locked the door to the room and put the chain across. Then I dragged the chair in front of the closet for good measure. I turned the TV on low to fill the air and watched static until the picture resolved into a wildlife show, as if any warm voice would keep the cold at the door. When I muted it, I realized the dripping was gone again, and then the closet knocked once, gently, which felt almost polite, which is somehow worse. By midnight on my watch, the hallway had gone quiet, and the rain climbed back into sleet. The heater breathed. The guest book sat on the dresser with its last line whispering still here under the numbers. I lay on the bed fully dressed and kept my shoes on, because that is what you do when part of you expects to run. The clock on the nightstand stayed, wrong and bright. The room felt like a held breath that would not be released until I did something specific, which I was not ready to name. The first real escalation came when I tried to leave. I admit that. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and heard a series of knocks that ran not just from the closet, but across the wall above the headboard, to the ceiling, then to the door of the room itself, quick as a fingertip traveling along a map. It did not sound like pipes. It did not sound like wind. It sounded like someone tracking my movement from inside spaces that should not contain a person. The chain on the door trembled once, soundless, and settled in a way that made my throat tighten. I called the front desk from a room phone, which had a sticky receiver and a "you're calling the office" label on the base. The clerk answered on the first ring and let me talk more than he spoke. When I said there's someone in the closet, he said very calmly that the closet in 217 sticks and the wind can make it tick. He offered to move me to 215, but when I asked if anyone was in 215, he paused long enough to feel like something had crossed a threshold, and then he said it was not available after all, which sounded like a reason disguised as a sentence. I asked him if the guest who wrote "still here" in the book was some kind of joke, because I wanted him to laugh and tell me yes, and we would share that. He did not laugh. He said the guest book is a courtesy. He said we do not always get what we think we want. The line went quiet, and when he came back, he said, "Do not open the closet in that room." And his voice slipped on the word "open" like it was the one thing he could not control. The knocking stopped while he spoke, then resumed when I hung up. I made a deal with myself. Stay until 2:30. If the room behaves, sleep. Wake early, leave. If the room keeps playing games, take the loss and drive in the night. I set an alarm on my phone for 2:30, and the phone screen threw blue light across the bed. The unplugged clock still showed 3:17, and somehow it felt like it was watching my phone, not me, which made me cover it with a Motel notepad, like you cover a mirror in a room that has seen too much. At 1:10, the knocking changed. It moved from hollow to a wetter sound, like knuckles tapping damp wood. The air near the closet took on a mineral smell, like raw well water, and the temperature dropped enough that my breath made a faint cloud when I exhaled. I tapped the chair with my toe to prove I was not frozen, and the closet tapped back with my exact rhythm, like an impatient mimic, which is the first moment I understood it was not a pattern. It was a response. I said out loud that whoever you are, stop it, which is what you say when you think you are still alone. The TV remote clicked dead. The screen washed black for a heartbeat, then came back with the same nature show, a deer freezing, looking toward the camera as if it heard a distant sound that a human ear could not parse. The dripping I had heard earlier began again, but it came from the closet now, very soft, a metronome under the taps, and I felt the timing tighten in my chest. The second escalation was the hallway itself. I opened the door to the hall with the chains still hooked, like a child peering out of a blanket, and listened. The diamond carpet absorbed sound. No TV from any room. No voices. The ice machine at the end of the hall hummed, and the light above it flickered, which felt like a reasonable source for the noise, and I almost believed it. A man in a dark coat stepped from the stairwell, glanced at me, and then looked down so fast that it seemed rehearsed. He walked past without a word and did not leave footprints on the damp runner, which I noticed only when the door closed and the chain rattled my hand. I went to the ice machine because I needed a human noise. The bin was dry. The cord drooped behind the stand unplugged, so that hum was not real, which left me embarrassed and cold. On the wall to the left hung a laminated notice that read quiet hours 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. Below that, a scribble in ballpoint cut through the plastic, "It is never quiet in 217. The air near the machine was warmer. When I returned to my room, the door had locked itself. The chain lay against the wood. It took me 2 tries before the key turned. Inside, the guest book was open to the same page, but the signature that had said "Still Here" now had a small arrow pointing to the margin where someone had written your turn, the letters thin and exact like someone tracing a stencil. I told myself I had not noticed that before, but I felt the lie while I used it. The heater coughed and went silent for a long count. The unplugged clock burned 3:17 into the air as if flirting with my idea of time. I checked my phone. 1:46. The numbers felt like 2 languages trying to talk through the same mouth. I decided to leave at 2, and that decision felt like unscrewing a lid. I packed fast and kept my breathing shallow. The closet knocked, almost cheerful now, a cadence like someone warming up to tell a story. I dragged the chair away from the door because it felt childish, and even that tiny surrender felt like permission. When I moved the chair, the knocking stopped for exactly 1 breath, then resumed, as if adjusting its position to match mine. The knob of the closet twitched right, then left, as if someone were testing it from inside with a fingertip. I called the desk again and got a ring that rolled and rolled without an answer. When it finally clicked, all I heard was a line of cold air. I said hello, and something whispered hello back in perfect sync with my voice, not like a recording, but like a person beneath my words. I set the receiver down and watched the room from beside the door, and the closet gave me a knock so gentle it could have been a request. The unplugged clock brightened. The numbers took on a halo. My phone screen dimmed itself without my touch, which felt like a polite goodnight. At 1:58, I made a choice. Either I would leave now, stepping past whatever watched the door, or I would answer. It is strange how often that is all it is. Do you step away from a strange rhythm, or do you align yourself with it? I wanted to be the kind of person who leaves, but there was that arrow in the guest book and a note that said your turn, and I kept feeling the sinking shame of missing the interview, a different knocking on a different door. I lifted my hand and knocked the pattern I had heard first. 2 taps, a pause, then 1. The room listened. The closet listened. Even the sleet seemed to hold itself like a thought in a cold mind. Then from inside the closet came 2 taps, a pause, then 1, perfect, delighted like a child who's found the right game. The dripping quickened to match the rhythm, like water counting. I laughed once, a small breath that hurt, and said I get it. And the closet answered with 3 slow taps that arranged themselves into a triangle of sound, as if drawing 217 in the dark. The third escalation was not louder. It was closer. The knocks left the wood and arrived inside the walls like bone. I could feel them in my teeth. When I tapped once on the dresser, the tap answered under my palm, through the wood, as if the room had learned the trick of being wherever I... A whisper threaded through the heater fins and said your turn the way my own father would say it when passing a wrench. The unplugged clock flickered, not changing numbers, only brightening like a smile. My phone alarm for 2:30 jumped ahead and glitched to 3:17, then corrected itself, then died entirely. I tried to trace the rational thread and found one. The ice machine must have a line in the wall behind the closet. Vibration can travel along stud and conduit. I went to the ice machine again with my hands numb from the cold room, and I found the cord still unplugged. The laminate notice there had peeled at the corner, and behind it, etched into the paint with something sharp, was a series of lines and dots, like a prison tally that kept correcting itself. When I ran my fingers over it, I felt only paint, which made less sense than if it had cut me. Back in the room, I crouched at the closet door and put my ear to the wood. The knocking stopped because I was the one making sound now, my breath and my pulse. The wood was cold enough to ache. There's a sound a person makes when they're on the other side of wood, a hollow pressure of breath that does not reach air, And that is what I heard, and then a single word through that pressure, which was here, not loud, not desperate, only certain. I stood up too fast, and the room tilted like a picture frame, as if I had knocked something out of plumb. I needed more light. I turned on the bathroom light, the entry light, the TV glow, and the room grew bright without feeling warmer. The guest book remained open as if it had hands. I looked at the page and found that next to the signature with no checkout date, the words "still here" had gone faint, and beneath them something darker had bled through, like a second layer surfacing. It was my last name in smaller letters, exact spelling, the ink fresh enough to smudge if I touched it, and I did not touch it. I looked at the clock, 3:17. I looked at my phone, dead. I looked at the door, which did not look back. I could leave. I told myself that sentence like a mantra. Unlock the chain, shoulder the bag, walk fast. Keys, ignition, wipers rode. But the cold had moved behind the bed, into that dark wedge on the carpet where hotel beds never quite meet the wall. The knocking paced there once like a footfall and crossed to the closet again, which meant it did not care where I moved. It cared about whether I played. I set my bag down and felt the decision harden. If I fled, I would take the rhythm with me in my bones because that is how music works when it finds a home. I chose to end it by answering it. That felt like a kind of courage I could control. I stood at the closet and laid my palm flat against the wood, a bridge made of heat and skin. I knocked 4 times, slow and deliberate, a pattern the room had not used. The reply came, but not from the closet. It came from the headboard, then the floor, then the window, tallying my knocks like a polite audit. The cold increased as if fed by each exchange. The numbers 3 verse 17 swam in my peripheral vision, even when I looked away, as if burned into the air. Open, said the whisper, and the red herring tried one last time to save me. Remember what the clerk said, do not force it. Remember what plumbing can do in a building like this. Remember the ice machine and the hall, and all the small ways you have been wrong before. I can tell you it felt credible because it offered me a normal night. The detail that killed, it was the clock, unplugged yet watching. 317 mirrored against 217 like a message folded back on itself. I could not put that in the toolbox of ordinary mistakes. I turned the knob. The door resisted like a stiff shoulder. It yielded a hair's width, and the smell of wet concrete slipped out, sharp as a coin on the tongue. The knocking stopped and shifted to a single slow tap from deep inside, like a well rope brushing a stone rim. I pulled, and the wood gave another fraction, and something tapped again, closer now, patient and unafraid. The cold rolled over my chest like a careful hand. I said, I am opening this, and even as I said it, I knew that sentence could not be unsaid. The closet door swung in a slow arc, and the space behind it was not the size the room promised. It was deeper by a yard than the building could allow, a narrow shaft lined with unfinished studs, and at the very back, an old maintenance door with a slot where a key should slide. Hanging from a nail in the stud was a brass key on a leather fob stamped 217, which had a greasy sheen like old breath. The dripping was louder now, but there was no water, only the sound doing its best impression of water to keep me calm. In the maintenance door were marks at shoulder height, small and neat, 4 and then a diagonal through them, repeated as if someone had counted days or tries. The cold was centered on that door, like a thought waiting to be recognized. I whispered hello, and what came back was my own tone, my own shape, but it said be quick, and the words lined up perfectly with a memory that was not mine. A night like this, a different traveler who had been late for a meeting, who had knocked back to be brave, and then had put his ear to the wood one last time. I pressed the key into the slot, because not doing it would keep me on this carpet all my life. The metal turned. The maintenance door creaked open a hand's width. Darkness pooled there, not empty, but thick, the way a theater is full of people breathing before the lights go up. The knocking resumed, not from the door now, but from behind me, a slow measured rapping on the room's main door, as if the hall itself were asking to be let in. When I looked, the chain twitched once, a tiny prayer, and stilled. What stepped out of the maintenance space was not a figure. It was colder air shaped like a decision, and it smelled like wet coins and old dust. It touched my wrist and found my pulse and matched it, and I thought of the guest book line that had never checked out, still here. The twist of it came to me, then, simple as a number. 317 is a mirror of 217 with a mark in the middle to remind you which side you are on. The room does not need bodies. It needs acknowledgement. It needs a rhythm partner who will keep the time when the last one falters. Something leaned very close without weight and breathed the word your turn in a voice I knew too well, because it was the way I sound when I tell myself I can handle this. I began to knock without meaning to a slow triangle that matched the bed, the dresser, the window, and the knocks wrote my name on the air as they had before, and I understood why the guest book ink had my letters. Not a message, a mold. The room had learned me now. I pulled the maintenance door, closed with both hands, and the knocking rushed into the wood like rain into soil. I turned the key back and yanked it free. The closet stilled, but the cold remained, and in that cold was a polite patience I had already met. I took 3 steps back, the way you step away from a cliff you have been measuring with your toes, and I grabbed my bag, and I left the room as neatly as a person can leave when something counts each motion like beads. The hall was brighter than before, because dawn had begun to think about arriving. The ice machine was quiet without pretending to hum. I walked to the office with the key clenched so tight the fob left its circle mark in my palm. The clerk stood at the desk like he had never moved. His tie sat crooked. His eyes found the key. He shook his head once. He said, more gently than I expected, some closets should stay closed. I said I agree, and he slid a pen to me for the checkout line, which was a kindness, and my hand shook when I signed. He asked if I had slept, and I told him a version of the truth. He asked if I had heard anything unusual, and I said yes. And he nodded like he had added me to a list that did not change anything but allowed him to make the next pot of coffee without thinking too hard about ghosts. When I pushed the office door open, the cold followed me through the gap like a well-trained animal. The clerk saw the air behind me and looked away, which felt like respect or refusal. I could not tell. I loaded the bag into my brother's trunk. The world felt brighter and thinner, like paper left in sun. The sleet had become a fine mist. Birds tried their morning practice, and the highway hissed in the distance like a sleeping thing. I sat behind the wheel and took a breath that felt like the first one in hours. The car clock blinked ready to be set, and when I turned the ignition, it rolled straight to 317 as if it had been waiting for its cue, and I laughed because sometimes you laugh when the alternative is naming what you have done. I told myself the number was a joke the universe likes to play when you are tired. I told myself the cold in the car was the weather. I told myself the weight in the trunk was only a bag. I pulled out of the lot and did not look up at the window of 217, and I did not look at the clerk, and I kept the wipers at a steady beat. The highway welcomed me with that open ribbon of no questions asked, and I took it like a pardon, which was almost the right word. 10 miles down, where the trees crowd the shoulders and the road surface sighs, something knocked from the trunk. One slow tap, a pause, then one. Not a rattle. Not a loose tool. A knock that knew me. The air inside the car grew a shade colder, enough to fog the rearview mirror at the edge where it frames the lane, and the fog beaded and slid down in lines like tally marks, 4 in a diagonal through them. Neat and patient, counting something that does not end when you drive away. If you have ever brought a rhythm home by accident, you know the feeling I had then. I did not pull over. I did not open the trunk on the shoulder like someone in a cautionary tale. I kept driving while the knock tested the shape of the car, light and curious, not angry, not urgent. It was as if it needed to know how this new room sounded. The heater pretended to help. The radio whispered static that arranged itself into almost words. My name surfaced once and slid away, and I did not correct it. By the time the sun lifted the sky to gray, the clock had decided to behave like a normal clock again, and the knock went still as if sleeping. The road signs for my exit appeared like promises I was not sure I should keep. I checked the mirror and saw nothing in the back seat, only the soft fog that stubbornly traced numbers before it vanished. A 2 that became a 1 that became a 7. Then nothing, which is a way to say hello without being obvious. I told myself I would open the trunk at the gas station. I told myself I would not wait. I pulled into a fuel stop that sold coffee and lottery tickets and optimism. I stepped out and locked the car with a click that felt like it could hold the world. The air smelled like diesel and wet cardboard and an idea of morning. I put my hand on the trunk lid and felt the faintest answering touch from the other side, like a friend tapping your palm through a pane of glass. The choice I had made it to in the morning vibrated there as if choices have aftershocks, and I understood that consequences sometimes travel slow. I did not open the trunk. Not then. I filled the tank and bought coffee that tasted like warmth, and I stood in the thin sun while the clock in the store window blinked 7:13, which I pretended not to notice, even as it felt like numbers could smile. I got back in and drove toward a building where people ask you questions about responsibility and staying power. The knock did not return that morning, which is almost worse because quiet gives your mind too much room, and every quiet place is a kind of closet if you listen long enough. If you're listening now, I will tell you the only thread I cannot tie off. In the guest book on that dresser, under the name with no checkout date, there was a second line after still here that had not been there when I arrived. A date, written small and neat, the day after I left. I do not know who will write it, or whether I already have, or whether the room keeps its own calendar and draws names the way it learns knocks. I do know that sometimes my bathroom mirror fogs at 3:17, and the fog writes a shape that could be any number if you were kind. Story 2. The vacancy light that never turns off the first time it said my name. It did not speak so much as hum it, folded into that neon red glow that stains your hands long after you walk away. And if you have ever heard your own name come from a light, you know why I did not sleep until something else went dark. I pulled off the 2-lane highway at dusk because the storm ahead looked like a blade laid flat against the sky. I travel for work, little inspections that keep the lights legal, and a missed visit means a missed payment I cannot afford. The roadside motel looked like an honest mistake with a roof, which was exactly my price range, and the vacancy sign was bright enough to reach across the lot like a promise that could not wait. By day, neon has no business looking alive, but this one pulsed even as the sun bled out behind the trees. I stood in the gravel with rain freckling my glasses and felt it warm against my cheeks the way a campfire can lull you into staring. The air tasted faintly scorched, not like wire, more like a blown match cupped close. It made me think of birthdays and wishes, which is a dangerous association for a motel sign to invite. Do you agree? Inside, the lobby buzzed like a nest tucked into drywall. The night clerk wore a blue shirt with a stitched name that I could not make out because he would not stop moving. He slid a clipboard toward me and asked how many nights. No eye contact, just a little twist of his mouth each time the sign outside flared brighter. The registry was thin on variety. The same 5 names down a column, over and over, as if the pen had fallen into a rut. I laughed without meaning to. He did not. I told him I was in town to check a different property in the morning and needed a room that did not leak. The storm coughed lightning across the window like a tired throat clearing. He said 2nd floor, room 12, and when I asked whether the vacancy sign ever turns off, he said only when it wants to, which I treated like a joke because the cheaper thing is always to treat it like a joke at first. He handed me a metal key. It felt colder than the air. The hallway outside was quieter than the lobby by an entire species. Carpet absorbed footsteps without giving anything back. Someone had propped the fire door with a folded magazine, and the wind flirted with it, but it never quite closed. I could still hear that buzz, faint through the walls, like bees arguing under the paint. My room smelled like a memory of lemon and something singed. The alarm clock on the dresser blinked 4:0, for even though the lamp beside it was unplugged, which made my chest tighten, not because of the number, but because it wanted to be noticed. I set my bag on the chair and went back outside, because curiosity can save you or sell you depending on what meets first. The rain had settled into a steady hiss. I walked under the eave to the sign. The transformer housing on the pole should have been hot if the tubes were running, but it felt cool enough to press my cheek against it and not regret it. I opened the access panel with my screwdriver and found the main line clipped and taped. No choose. My meter read 0. The tubes glowed anyway, patient as coals, which left electricity without a chair to sit in. If you're thinking capacitors, residual charge, leak, so was I am not new to tricks. I cut power at the main, watched the property sigh to darkness, listened to the ice machine at the end of the breezeway die into silence. The vacancy sign did not blink. It brightened, woke a shade redder. The buzz deepened to a purr, and in that purr, I thought I heard two syllables arranged like my name. Not clear enough to be sure, just enough for doubt to open its eye and look around. Back in the lobby, the clerk pretended to be busy with a ledger that did not accept his pen. I told him the main was cut and his sign was still lit. He said the sign has its own mind, and I told him appliances do not have minds, and he said some do. He offered me a free bottle of water as if that would fix me. The registry sat between us with the top page turned. I saw my own name at the bottom of the list with tomorrow's date already written beside it. I had not written it. The ink shone slightly as if fresh. I slept with one shoe on because a habit like that is a hedge against the kind of night that forgets to be kind. The storm negotiated with the roof, then quieted as if a deal had been struck. Around midnight, a knock passed down the hall like a thought that did not belong to anyone yet. My phone showed no service. The buzz threaded the walls, delicate as floss, not painful, just present. When I sat up, the room dipped colder by a notch, and the clock blinked from 4:04 to 12:40 without showing the numbers between, as if time were a row of rooms and it could skip the occupied ones. I told myself the repetition in the registry was some bored clerk copying for show. The burnt smell was water licking old wiring. The buzz was eccentric ballast that would settle after the storm. Red herrings are cheaper than admitting you have heard your own name from a sign, and they come with reasons I could recite like prayers. I went back outside to prove myself right. It is a particular humiliation when the proof likes you. The lot had gone reflective with puddles, dark as smoked glass. The sign burned against the sky as soft heart attacked shade of red. I stood under it and listened. The buzz was layered. Close up, I could hear the top line like a cord from an electric fence. Beneath it, a second tone tessellated into something almost like words, and beneath that, if I breathed shallow and counted, a third rhythm clicked like a relay timing a cycle. The relay sounded like welcome when the wind caught it, which is a word that should not live in metal. I had my ladder in the trunk because I travel like a pawn shop. I set it and climbed. The wet rungs bit cold in my fingers. I touched the glass tubing and expected heat. I found temperature like stone. Inside the tubing, not gas, not light, but a slow drift like smoke thinking about what shape it should hold. While I moved my hand, the smoke moved too, curious. The burnt smell swelled then thinned. The letter N in vacancy brightened and dimmed as if breathing. The next breath said the first half of my name and waited to see if I would pretend not to notice. A door opened below, left to the lobby, then closed again without footsteps. A woman crossed the lot carrying a soda and did not make a ripple in the puddles. Her reflection in the glass of the sign did not behave. It lagged. It smiled when she did not. I climbed down because the ladder had become part of the scene and I was not ready to see the entire scene yet. The woman turned toward the stairwell, and on the landing she was gone. No turn, no door. Just gone. Like she found a corridor only the sign could illuminate. I told myself that I was overtired, and the brain stumbles at edges when you drive all day. I went to the office to complain because structure is comforting when reality wanders. The clerk watched the TV with the sound off, his eyes watering a little as if from smoke that was not in the room. I asked again about the sign. He said it keeps the rooms from going empty. He said empty rooms are bad for business. He said if you must know, it is worse when the sign goes out. He said the way you say cold weather is worse than rain once you have lost a roof. When I asked him about the registry names repeating, he placed his hand over the page and said privacy, which was funny because privacy left this place the minute the light learned how to hum people. He pulled his hand away and I saw the last 5 names again, in order, then in the next column, the same 5 names in a different order, then again. I recognized the first name from a news story about a car that burned beside a motel far from here. The smell washed the room as if agreeing. The hum behind the walls rose and fell like a crowd at a stadium. At 1:20, the storm returned as a low-frequency roll that arrived a breath before thunder. The property lights flickered and surrendered. The vacuum of sudden dark pressed hard and then released when the sign outside sighed brighter than ever, painting the lobby red as a photo lab. The clerk did not move. He whispered, almost with relief, "Quiet hours," and the phrase sat wrong in my ear, maybe because hours that announce their own quiet rarely keep it. My phone stayed dead in my pocket, as helpful as a receipt. The hallway ate sound again when I went upstairs. Room 10 door ajar, TV snowing. Room 11 silence like a stage waiting for a cue. Room 12 mine, smelling like citrus over something unnatural, a chemistry lab for ghosts. Through the curtains, the sign pulsed. Each pulse had a rhythm I could not ignore. 3 quick beats, a breath, then 2 long, matching syllables of my name. My heart made itself small so it could fit between those beats without touching them. I sat on the bed and placed my heels on the floor because I wanted to feel the building. The first price I paid for curiosity was sleep. The second price was help. The desk line rang and rang. When someone answered, it was not the clerk. It was the buzz shaped into a voice that said checking in, and then the line breathed like a lung and went still. I went to the window and watched the red spill across the lot. A man in a yellow jacket walked under the eave and paused to light a cigarette that did not smoke. He lifted it to his mouth anyway and inhaled, a pure habit without physics, then melted toward the sign until he stood directly under the inn. The inn brightened as if satisfied. The misdirection that almost saved me was a framed certificate on the wall outside the office. It commemorated a remodel after a small fire a decade back, with a date and a signature an insurance adjuster would recognize. Burnt smell buzzing in the walls, guests who behave like rewound tape. It fed a theory I could live with. A haunting is a story with rules. Wiring is a puzzle with screws. I went outside with my toolkit and told myself I would kill the circuit no matter how rude the sign insisted on being. The access panel hit a small switch I had missed. A cutout for a relay that would keep a sign on during outages, a safety feature for advertising. That was my red herring. Relays can stick. I pulled the switch and pocketed it. The sign did not notice. The relay socket was cold as a confession. The hum in the glass thickened. My meter still read 0, and my fingers tingled from nothing, the worst kind of contact. I leaned close and smelled something like charred sugar, sweet and wrong. Then the glass showed me a face I knew from a news site thumbnail, blinking slowly like a photograph learning to breathe. His mouth moved out of sync with the shape of his eyes. He formed a word that could have been here, or help, or hello. I knew the story. Car fire on a winter night. No survivors. Motel in the background of one shot if you zoomed and strengthened. The registry had his name before mine. The sign brightened when his lips formed the H in hello. The buzz under the hum resolved to layered voices counting rooms, and a new rhythm joined, as crisp as a metronome. It brought a clock with it. Quiet hours is a joke in a place like this, but there was a schedule. From 1 to 4 the sign refills, like lungs moving air while you sleep. If the letters stay bright through dawn, no one leaves. The clerk had not lied. Empty rooms are bad for their business. The rooms were never meant to be empty. The sign did not advertise availability. It made sure there was always someone to wear the word vacancy, like a coat. I felt the thought drop into place with a heavy little click that rearranged everything I'd seen. The clock on my dresser blinked 3:27, though it had no right. The hallway whispered with the sound of doors that were not opening. I could go now, while rain softened and the road begged. Or I could try to turn the sign off, which would be a choice that belongs to fools and heroes, and people who do not want to dream with a red light behind their eyes for the rest of their... I thought of my rent and my sister who had loaned me rent twice. I thought of the man in the glass and the column of repeating names waiting for mine to become a chorus. I climbed the ladder again because I have this flaw where I believe that if I witness the mechanism, I own it. The tubes were brighter, but the light did not touch my skin. It soaked in without warmth like dye. On the inside of the glass, a thin ash clung. Not dust, more like words burned and smeared. I took a rag from my pocket and wiped. The ash streaked, then folded away from the cloth, as if refusing to leave because it had a job. In that ash a letter appeared that was not part of Vacancy at all. It was the first letter of my name. The choice hardened inside me. Stay and be hunted by a sign until it learns me completely, or make the sign listen to me once. There was an old metal toggle on the far side of the frame, a manual override no one had used in years. If I could set the sign to NO Vacancy, maybe the cycle would break, maybe the rooms would give up their claims for one night. I leaned out, found the toggle, and felt it move like an old tooth. My fingers shook so hard I thought of dropping. When it flipped, nothing changed, which is how some choices announce themselves. Then the glass went so bright the world went black behind it, a negative afterimage that made me nauseous. The hum flattened into a single line. The letters of NO flickered over the word I knew too well, superimposed like two photographs. In that overlay, I saw a dozen faces pressed to glass, as if to a window. They did not look out. They looked past me, toward the lobby. They were waiting for the registry to say yes. The realization came late, but clear. No vacancy is not a defense. It is a statement that the rooms are already full. I had taken something into my hands I could not hold, and I dropped it. The immediate consequence was a change in the air. The burnt sugar smell lifted, replaced by the true acid scent of overheated wire, the one I had been missing. The delayed echo arrived a moment later, quiet as a new thought. My name hummed from the tubes with affection I did not want. The sign did not need power. It needed a reader. It needed a clerk. It needed someone to write names in a book and mean it. I ran to the office with the storm stuttering light along the windows. The clerk looked older without the pain of red on his face. He moved his hand off the registry when he saw me and said, very clearly, "Do not sign," which would have helped earlier. The top page showed a fresh line in my blocky handwriting that I had not written, spelling my name with a neat little flourish I would never add. The checkout column was empty. The date was tomorrow. I reached to tear the page, and his fingers closed on my wrist, gentle and final. He said that the sign keeps the guests alive as long as someone checks in for them. He said the first time it asked him to help he was 16 and the manager had laughed. He said laughing does not change a thing once the red learns you. He said there are worse prisons than glass, and then he let go. The buzz in the walls layered into 3 threads. 1 counted rooms. 1 learned names. 1 whispered a simple instruction that felt like a suggestion coming from inside my mouth. Write. Replace. Stay. I made my last choice. I did not write. I took the page and folded it into my pocket. The quiet between us grew so thick I could hear the rain threading the corrugations of the awning. The clerk looked at the door without moving, like a man who listens at sea for the sound the old sailors know. Then the sign outside blinked to black for the first time since I arrived. The lobby went colorless. The humming from the walls stopped as if someone had pressed 2 fingers beneath its tongue. The relief was not pure. Something shifted upstairs, 1,000 tiny sand grains settling. The faces in the tubes, if they were faces and not my exhausted brain drawing patterns, faded like breath on a mirror. The burned sugar sent left with a last little sigh. The ordinary smell of damp carpet asserted itself with pride. The clerk sagged and then straightened. He said, "You bought a night." He touched the spine of the ledger like it was a pet that had been cruel but loyal. He said, "Dawn makes a difference." He said, "Go sleep." I went to my room and lay with my eyes open while the clock refused to tell the truth. I heard someone walk past my door and stop, then continue, then stop, the way you do when you're trying to remember which door is yours. Around 3:50, the quiet became a person and sat on the edge of my bed. The mattress did not move, but the air remembered what weight feels like. A voice said my name with the soft authority of a school roll call. I said, "I'm not staying." The voice said, "You already are," and then it filled the room with silence again. At dawn, there was no buzz, which felt like silence from an animal that is looking at you very carefully. I checked out with a nod. The clerk kept his eyes on his hands, but when I turned to go, he said, without malice, "Lights find their own power." He said it like weather. He said it like regret. I drove with the windows cracked because the car held a sweetness that belonged in someone else's lungs. 10 miles out, the sun lifted one edge of the storm and laid a sheet of white over the asphalt. I passed a boarded gas station, then a stretch of pines that leaned toward the road like relatives who want to tell you a secret. The radio chose a station by itself, a ghost of AM that hissed and cleared just enough to lay a note of singing under the engine. The clock on the dash twitched from 6:59 to 7:04 in a hiccup, then froze. The air inside cooled and warmed in slow pulses like breathing. I told myself I had interrupted a trick. I told myself I had stolen back my name by refusing to sign. I told myself I had tired my senses into a mistake and would laugh about it later, gently, the way you laugh about a storm that did not hit your house. Then I saw another motel set back from the road, small and lifeless, except for the sign that leaned over it like a thought. Vacancy glowed too red for morning. The glass brightened when my car drew level. The hum unfolded one higher thread that did not belong to any insect. It said my name. It said it with affection and patience. It said it as if it had been waiting for me to arrive since before I made the first turn into the first lot. The faces in the letters were not faces now. They were silhouettes of empty rooms, made briefly visible and then gone, like a blink. The smell of blown matches slid through the vents without object. I looked at the registry I had folded in my pocket and felt paper heat through denim, an embarrassment of evidence. I did not stop. That is the truth. I kept driving because I do not know the rules of a world where light wants you and knows your letters. I kept driving because stopping would have been a kind of check-in. The sign receded in the mirror, but the color hung on my cheeks for a few miles, as if embarrassed for me. When I finally pulled into a different town and a different day, the only thing I brought with me I could not explain was how the overhead lamps in the cafe hummed for a moment when I said my name to the server, then settled like a dog that recognizes you and chooses to wait. If you were wondering what I did with the registry page, I am wondering too. I have not opened it. It sits in the glove box like a seed that might sprout if given air. Sometimes at red lights, I feel a warm pressure behind my teeth, as if words want to come out that are not mine. Sometimes I wake at 4:04 and the room glows the color of a thought I refuse to articulate. Sometimes I pass a strip of old hotels at the edge of a city and every sign brightens as if to ask whether I changed my mind yet. Now we move to the third story, the manager who never blinked. Story 3. The manager who never blinked. I knew something was wrong with the manager the moment a moth flew into his face and stayed there, powdering his lashes with gray dust while he kept smiling at me, eyes wide and bright and perfectly, impossibly open, as if blinking was a luxury he had given up a long time ago and wanted me to notice. It was late, the thoughtful kind of late that turns highway lines into ropes, and I had promised myself a cheap bed and a full tank before sunrise. The motel sat behind a tired gas station with a cracked window that said hot coffee in red paint. I travel for work and second chances, both of which I am running out of. The job in the morning could keep me afloat. A no-show would sink me. You know that tired math where the smallest delay can capsize you. Inside the lobby, the air smelled like lemon oil and old coins. A clock hung above the desk. It had no second hand, only a stuttering minute that seemed to think before it moved. The manager wore a navy vest and a polite smile. He greeted me by name before I said it, which I chalked up at the card on the counter, but he had not looked down. He was looking at me. He kept looking, even when the moth arrived and dusted him. Even when he breathed through his mouth to blow it away, his eyes stayed open and wet as glass. He slid a brass key toward me. No number on the fob, just weight and cold. I asked which room, and he said, "You know the one," which is the sort of line you hear in a story and dismiss in real. He corrected himself and tapped a second key. This one read 109. The no-number key stayed between us like a dare. Over his shoulder hung a painting that did not fit the motel at all. A gilded frame, a storm of color, hundreds of tiny, painted eyes tucked into brushstrokes of leaf and cloud, so cleverly hidden you only saw them when you felt watched. A housekeeper hurried past with a laundry cart and did not meet my gaze. A couple near the coffee urn kept their backs angled toward the desk. When a manager turned to photocopy my ID, I saw them glance at him the way you look at a dog behind a fence, and I caught one whisper to the other about the peepholes. Their lips barely moved. Their breath fogged the metal lid of the urn for a second, then faded, as if even steam knew to keep quiet around here. Room 109 faced the back lot where a single pole light hummed. The peephole on my door had a fisheye lens that made the hallway curve like a spine. I set my bag down and stood in the silence that follows decision. The clock by the bed matched the lobby clock. No second hand. Each minute jumped instead of swept, as if time here preferred not to blink either. A draft breathed under the door and wrote coolness along my ankles. When I cupped my hand around the peephole to look, I saw the manager standing a few feet from my door, perfectly still, perfectly polite, like a man who waits because it is his skill. I stepped back fast enough to nudge the bed frame. The peephole turned my heart into a tiny drum. I checked again because you always check again, and the hall was empty. Footsteps sounded above me, then stopped, then resumed with that false rhythm that means a person is keeping time with your nerves. I told myself to sleep. My phone had one bar, which felt like a breadcrumb, and I kept the bedside lamp on because I pretend not to be superstitious while doing everything superstition asks. The first real disturbance came quietly, a soft scrape at the door, like a fingertip measuring wood grain. I looked through the peephole and saw the manager closer now as I lined up with mine, lid wide, pupil steady. He did not flinch at the distortion. He did not blink. He did not breathe fog onto the glass. My own breath made a halo that hit him and then cleared to reveal he had not moved at all. I said, "Can I help you through the door?" And he said simply, "I am the manager," which is not an answer, only a position, and I was suddenly aware of how many positions can be held without blinking. I went back to the lobby to complain because process is a rope you grab when the floor wobbles. The painting watched me approach. In the lampshade light, the eyes inside the painted leaves caught tiny highlights. Some were brown, some green, some gray. As I crossed the room, I had the strong sense they were tracking me together, not in unison, but in relay, one eye passing me to the next like a baton. The manager stood behind the desk with his hands folded. A streak of moth dust still clung to one eyelash like frosting. I told him someone had been outside my door. He smiled without warmth and said he believed me. I asked for a different room. He said, of course, and slid the no-number key across the counter with a finger pressed to the fob as if the metal could feel pressure. I said I would rather have a numbered room. He withdrew the key, then placed it beside my elbow anyway, and turned the guest book toward me. The last 3 entries had the same last name written in different hands, as if one person had tried to sign 3 ways. The checkout column for each was blank. For sanity, I tried a theory. Maybe the manager had a condition. There are people who keep their eyes open longer than comfortable. Maybe contact lenses, some performance trick, something that fed this place's reputation. I watched for tears, eyes without blinks dry and sting. Not a glimmer, not a twitch. I leaned toward the desk and blew gently. Childish, I know, just enough to send a curl of dust into his face. He smiled and waited. A grain landed on his cornea and stayed there, tiny and cruel. He did not blink. He did not wince. The grain seemed to dissolve against that glazed shine, which felt like proof, but of what I could not say. Back in 109, I tested my own peephole again. Empty hall. The pole light outside tripped and recovered like a tired man. My phone called my sister and then pretended it had not. I opened the drapes a finger to see the lot. The lobby window reflected the painting like a second canvas, and I realized the pattern of eyes matched the number of rooms, a rough grid hidden in clouds and branches. The 7th brushstroke down had one painted eye that looked freshly wet, varnish shining like a tear. That was impossible. It was a detail my tired brain invented, which is what I told myself, because stories are easier when you get to choose the rules. The second escalation arrived as a church bell without a church. At the top of the hour, the lobby clock clicked, my bedside clock clicked, and the hallway lights dimmed for a breath, as if the building itself had blinked since the manager would not. Voices gathered outside my room, soft and layered, guests speaking through their doors. They mentioned peepholes again, and someone said, "Do not look twice," which is unhelpful advice when you already looked once. I looked twice. The manager stood farther away now, center of the hall, head tipped just enough to suggest patience, eyes bright as if he had slept and I had not. I decided then to find a maintenance guy or any witness who would tell me this is a thing that happens. This is the trick of a board night shift. The office door next to the ice machine had a slot for employees only. It was propped. Inside, a corkboard held keys on hooks. Most had numbers. One hook was labeled blank, and the key was missing. A freshly dusted outline marked where it had hung. On the desk sat a single file folder titled Eyelets, which is what you call the metal rings inside doors. The folder was empty. The impression of papers remained in the manila like a dry tattoo. The third escalation was the painting. I found myself back in a lobby because all answers here curved toward that desk. The manager had vanished, which was almost worse than the alternative. The painting seemed brighter without anyone in front of it. The brushwork had depth that felt unfair. The longer I stared, the more certain I became that the eyes moved with small, purposeful patience, like fish in a slow pond. One closed and opened again. Another tracked left to right and stopped where the peephole of room 109 would be in the grid that matched the rooms. A chill entered between my shoulder blades and took a seat there. That was when the housekeeper spoke to me in a whisper that nodded toward a scream. She stood near the laundry room door and did not look at the painting. She told me guests had reported someone watching through peepholes, and when they looked, they saw the manager's eye exactly where there should be. She said maintenance had replaced every peephole twice. She said the manager never uses keys, only appears. She said, in a voice that did not want to carry, that the painting arrived after a guest left in a hurry and no one knows who paid for it. Her breath misted on the chrome of the cart handle, then faded, and the cart wheels squeaked like a voice trying not to speak. I asked why she stayed. She looked at my hands instead of my face and said it pays on time. She said she has learned to keep her eyes down. Then she slid a folded note into my palm that read, "Do not take the blank key." The handwriting slanted like a person walking uphill. Before I could ask, she wheeled away. The lobby clock jumped another minute in a little spasm. The hallway lights dimmed again for a breath, and the painting's eyes seemed to brighten to fill the gap, generous and greedy. The misdirection that almost saved me was medical. People can train themselves to limit blinking. Performers do it. Magicians do it. The manager could be a trick, the painting a local legend for the board. The detail that broke the theory was in the glass. I went back to 109 and breathed onto the peephole lens to fog it on purpose. My cloud bloomed and slipped. For an instant, I saw another breath fog the glass from the hallway side, meeting mine in the middle like two hands on opposite panes. It formed a shape on the lens, a circle, then a vertical line through it, the simplest any child draws before they learn detail. At 2 in the morning, the desk phone in my room rang. The sound was antique and full. I lifted the receiver and said hello like I was already arguing with it. The manager's voice came warm and cheerful. He said he wanted to apologize for the confusion earlier. He said some guests find the painting unsettling. He said if it would put me at ease, he could move me to a room with no peephole. He said this last part slowly, like he was offering a kindness that had taken thought. I asked which room that would be. He said the one that does not have a number. He said, "You know the one. Choice does not always feel like a fork. Sometimes it feels like a narrowing hall. I could take the blank key and see where it fit. I could leave my bag and walk to my car and become a person who drives instead of a person who asks." I thought of my morning job and my rent and my habit of staying when I should go. I thought of the eyes in the painting, the comfort of being seen turned inside out. I made the choice that people like me make. I told him I would take the room with no peephole. He sounded delighted in a way that lacked surprise. The blank key was waiting on the desk, metal cool, leather fob smooth with a thumb shape worn into it by 100 decisions like mine. The manager stood nearby, hands folded, eyes open and shining. He did not look at the key. He looked at me as if the key was beside the point. He pointed me toward the end of the far hall, where a fire door sat with an alarm box that had never been wired. The door opened to a short service corridor that bent out of sight. The bulbs in the ceiling were bare, and a few were cold. My footsteps sounded like someone else following. At the turn, a narrow white door waited with no number, no peephole, no sign. The key turned without resistance. The air inside had the stillness of a closet that thinks it is a room. There was a bed and a chair and a dresser that seemed almost drawn instead of built. The window looked out on a wall 2 feet away. The clock on the dresser had no hands at all, just a blank face with the idea of time. On the wall opposite the bed hung a small mirror. As I exhaled, my breath fogged it. Words formed in it like a finger writing behind the glass. Do not blink. The point of no return is sometimes a sentence you read with your own breath. I stood in that thin room and realized someone had positioned the mirror at the exact height of my eyes, as if people are predictable that way. When I leaned closer, my reflection felt delayed, half a second slow, lagging like a stream on bad Wi-Fi. In that half second, I saw myself with my eyes still open while I had already flinched. The feeling made my stomach lean toward the floor. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. I made myself stay because I was tired of running and more tired of wanting to. The revelation arrived without ceremony. The painting is not art. It is inventory. The manager does not blink because blinking would separate him from the eyes he is using. He keeps them elsewhere. He sees through the peepholes, through the paintings, through the blank door, through the hallways where breath hangs thin. The eyes in the gilded frame match the rooms because they are the rooms. Everyone who looks in at this place leaves something behind that learns to look back. I knew it before I said it to myself. Knowing did not help. I tested the room by turning off the light. Darkness here felt crowded. The mirror kept the luminous idea of my face as if painted with leftover glow. I waited for my eyes to sting in water. They did not. My lids felt like blinds tied up with twine. The need to blink moved away from me, like a friend who crosses the street to take a different path. I told myself to close my eyes anyway. They did not move. The clock with no hands clicked once, and the sound was a nail somewhere settling against wood. He came without footsteps. One moment the doorway was empty. The next the manager stood there, polite as always, smile warm, eyes bright and wide. In the dim, his pupils swallowed color. He said, "How are we doing?" in that voice hotel workers learn, light and neutral, as if tone can float you on a lake of nothing. I said I cannot blink. He said few people can at first. He stepped into the room and the air dipped cooler by a notch. The mirror showed him arriving a split beat later than real. He did not look at his own reflection. He looked at mine as if checking the fit. I asked him what the painting is. He said it is a record. He said we keep what our guests cannot carry. He said some leave willingly. He said some do not. He said eyes want work. He said watching is work. He reached up and without touching me, adjusted something in the space between my face and the mirror, and my vision cleared like a lens being wiped. He nodded, satisfied, as if he had tightened a screw. I felt my heartbeat as a flicker at the edges of my sight, but my lids remained open and calm. I told him I needed to leave. He said everyone does. He said most come back. He said the painting helps them find the door. He said I could check out in the morning if I wished. He added, almost kindly, that it is easier if you do not look through peepholes. He rested his hand lightly on the blank key in my palm without taking it. Immediate consequence. My eyes stayed open without ache. Delayed echo. The mirror held my gaze half a second too long when I stepped away, as if the room kept a copy of me to use when I slept. I did not sleep. I sat in the chair and listened to the building breathe through vents that had no dust. At some hour that lacked a number, I walked back to 109 with the blank key tick hold in my... The hallway lights dimmed for their breath. In a lobby, the painting waited, patient and busy. I stood before it and looked straight into one green painted eye until the varnish seemed to ripple. For a moment, I felt a draft against my cheek like breath from the canvas. It smelled faintly of lemon oil and metal, a scent like old coins. At checkout, the manager was already at the desk with a receipt printed and my name on it. He never looked down to find the right sheet. He handed me a pen, and I signed because habit rides even on strange mornings. He said, "We hope to see you again," and I believe he meant it. He blinked then, once, too slow to be human, like shutters closing on a summer house that had decided to sleep with its windows open. The moth dust was gone. The gilded frame reflected a sliver of sun, and that flash made a white spot in my vision that would not leave. In the car, I looked in the rearview mirror to check if I looked as tired as I felt. My face looked back with a delay. My eyes looked back without closing. I tried to blink, and my lids obeyed the idea without fully moving, like a muscle you think of far away. The first tear did not arrive. My breath fogged the glass for a second. It wrote the simplest shape, a circle with a line through it, that child I had seen on the peephole lens. The fog faded, and the shape went with it, polite and persistent. I told myself it would pass. Bodies have rhythms. They find their way back. I drove to the morning job and smiled too much so my eyes would not have to. People asked if I had slept, and I said yes, and they nodded as if they had their own paintings at home. In the bathroom, I leaned toward the mirror and whispered, "Do not blink," to see what the room would do. My breath wrote the words in fog without my permission. A coworker in the next stall said, "Bless you," as if I had sneezed. The clock over the sink had no second hand. It ticked in tiny jumps that made me feel counted. There is one thread I cannot tie off, and I want to leave it with you. When I drove past the motel a week later, trying to prove to myself that memory cannot run a business, the painting was gone. In its place hung a photograph of the manager standing behind the desk, smiling, eyes open and bright. In the glass of the frame, I could see dozens of tiny reflections layered like scales. Some looked toward the door, some toward the hall, some at the camera, some at me. I thought for a moment that I saw my own face in one layer, a fraction of a second behind the rest, as if someone had filed it where the blank keys go. Now we move to the fourth story. It waits at the end of the hall by the ice machine, and it hums even when the plug is out. Story 4. The ice machine at the end of the hall. I only realized the ice was not melting, but breathing when one cube fogged the plastic scoop with a slow, patient exhale, like a sleeping thing testing the room. And if you have ever had a mouse somewhere in your hotel hallway, you know how fast a night becomes a trap with carpet. I stopped because the rain was turning to tiny knives and the highway looked like a rumor. I had a dawn appointment to inspect a failing roof for a buyer who pays slow, which is still better than not paying at all. One missed visit would knock the legs out from under me. The motel was a low strip of doors and humming lights, the kind of place that charges more for your worry than the room. I told myself 5 hours and out, simple. The first odd thing was the air. Cold moved in narrow pulses along the hallway like drafts with places to be. It led me to the end of the hall where an ice machine sat under a hand-lettered sign. Do not use after midnight. The outlet below the machine was empty, cord coiled like a sleeping snake. Still, the machine hummed as if it had work to do. I pretended it was residual vibration. My brain prefers lies with small motors, but my skin did not believe me yet. Room 108 smelled like lemon cleaner fighting a losing war. I set my bag on the chair and noticed a wet shoe print near the threshold that was not mine, thinning toward the hall. Rain, I told myself. The clock blinked 11:28, a number that felt like a fuse burning. I wandered back to the ice machine to fill the bucket so I could pretend to be normal. The machine breathed cool air on my wrist. I pressed the lever and it struggled, then coughed out a handful of cubes that smelled faintly metallic like pennies in winter. There was a paper cup jammed in the chute, glued to the plastic with frost. The cup held slush the color of watered fruit punch. Not bright, more like someone had stirred in rust. It shivered when I touched it, as if it had muscles. I left it alone and told myself that someone had spilled an energy drink. Red herring accepted. I tugged the plug from the wall harder, just to prove I was in charge, but the cord only drifted and settled, and the hum did not waver, which should have ended the game. Back in 108, the peephole curved the world into a fishbowl. The hallway light flickered a patient rhythm, the kind a motel accepts as a personality trait. I texted my sister that I was in for the night. She had loaned me the car again and did not deserve another mess. At 11:49, I heard the first drag of water down the hall, a small sound like someone walking with a soaked hem. When I looked, the carpet was dry, but a thin glitter lay along the baseboard like frost set its own borders. Unknown before danger. That is the kind of detail you step over until it circles back wearing teeth. I made coffee from the packet and watched steam coil into the cold room and thin as if afraid. The ice bucket tinked softly on the dresser, like cubes settling, only I had put it away empty. I lifted the lid. A single cube sat there, clear and perfect like a gift, and the bottom of the bucket was dry. The cube fogged, then cleared, as if deciding whether to speak. I closed the lid and told myself someone had delivered ice to the wrong room and changed their mind. At 12:03, the hallway changed temperature 1 degree at a time until my door became a cold window I could lean my cheek against to soothe the fever. Water puddles appeared in a stepping stone trail from the ice machine toward the stairs, then vanished, then reappeared, as if something could choose its footprints. I opened the door with the chain across and listened. The machine's hum ran under everything, like a low choir. Under the hum, something whispered in a sound that was not words yet, like a mouth forming vowels for practice. I went to the front desk with my bucket, because that is how you disguise a question as an errand. The clerk was a woman in a maroon cardigan, eyes soft, expression drained of surprise. I told her the ice machine was humming without power. She nodded and said it does that after midnight. She said, "Please, do not use it after midnight." She touched the bell on the counter, then pulled her hand away like it had been cold metal left in snow. Behind her hung a printed policy sheet. Quiet hours, 12 to 4. Ice machine unavailable after midnight. No refunds. Rules that felt like advice you ignore once. I asked if it was broken. She said no. She held my gaze too long, like someone who knows a dog behind a fence is deciding whether to learn your name. She added that maintenance removed the fuse years ago. Then she asked, casually, if anyone had asked me for ice in the hall. I said no. She seemed relieved in a way that made me less so. On my way back, I saw a thin line of water leading away from the machine toward 112, then bending, then stopping at a door with a service latch. The latch hung open, a small mouth yawning. Rising tension has a rhythm that tries to teach you a song it loves. At 12:20, I pressed the machine lever again, because habit is the cousin of doom. The chute scraped. Ice fell. Mixed in with the cubes were 3 coins stamped with a logo I did not recognize, cloudy with frost. A minute later, 2 more cubes fell by themselves, ringing the bucket like small bells. The paper cup in the chute trembled and settled. The hum under the hum broke into 2 threads, one low and steady, one quick and whispering, like gossip in a cold church. I told myself that kids shove things into machines. Coins happen. Paper cups happen. I told myself the metallic smell was cleaning chemical on the radiator. Red herrings are like coupons for sanity, and I clipped them all. When I turned to leave, a soft sound rustled in the bin, like a glove breathing. I looked. A square of frost pressed against the inner wall in the shape of a mouth. Lips parted, surface fogging and clearing. I stood transfixed while the mouth exhaled and a thin curl of white slid down and vanished at the lip. It wanted air. By 12:35, puddles traced a loop down the hall and back again. A neighbor opened his door, saw the water, frowned without truly seeing, and shut himself inside. The fluorescent tube buzzed like an idea it could not remember. I lifted the ice bucket and felt a tug downward. Not heavy, more like a magnet seeking metal through wood. Back in 108, the coffee tasted like secrets held a little too long. I checked the peephole again and nearly pressed my eye into it, which is the worst habit, but we all have them. A low voice asked softly, "Do you have ice?" It sounded like a person standing too close to the door. I looked. No one in the hall. The voice came again, shaped by the wood. not moving air, only implying it. It said, "I'm so cold." I did not answer, because the clerk's question had landed like a hook a few minutes earlier. The bucket lid trembled and clicked. I put my palm on it and felt cool pressure from the other side, the way a fish pushes against a boat hull to taste the world above. At 12:50, the machine began to spit more than cubes. A small tooth clinked into the bucket, off-white, human only because my brain refuses to invent stranger options. It lay there like a seashell on winter sand. A moment later, a plastic hotel key card fell with a sad ding, frost-rimmed, room 112 printed in faded blue. Under it, something softer thumped the bottom of the bin, then slid away as if embarrassed to be seen. I closed my hand over the bucket handle and felt a living chill rise to my skin. Isolation is not only quiet. It is the moment every voice in the world becomes the wrong one. The clerk did not answer when I called. The line rang until it sounded like part of the hum. My phone lost service. Outside, the rain stopped like a man who sees a police car. I stood with my back to the door and counted my breath. The ice machine felt silent long enough to make the silence an event, then coughed something wet and urgent and returned to humming, as if embarrassed by honesty. Revelation often wears a cheap coat. I went to 112 because the key card of my bucket had made the question too neat. The door stood ajar on the safety latch. A sheen of water crept under the threshold and cooled my toes through my shoes. Inside, the window unit ran hard and useless. No suitcase, no shoes. The bathroom light glowed like a low fever. The tub was dry, which meant the water in the hall had not come from here. On the counter sat another paper cup, full of the same red slush, a plastic stirring straw standing upright, as if a hand had just let go. I looked back toward the ice machine and saw the puddles lead past it now, not from it. The trail moved into the service door and down a narrow corridor that smelled like wet freezer burn, that sweet metallic note you taste on cold days when you bite your lip. The corridor ended at a cinder block room with a steel panel on the wall. The feed line that would have supplied water to the machine had been cut and capped. The power conduit hung open, wires taped and dead. On a shelf sat a replacement fuse, dusty and untouched. The red herring that collapsed came with relief. If the machine had no water and no power, then the coins in cube and tooth were planted as a joke. Someone trying to scare guests during quiet hours. I turned to leave, and that is when the machine breathed, long and steady. A single exhale down the corridor that fogged the cinder block for a moment and wrote a shape before it evaporated. The shape was a handprint at chest height, 5 long fingers, palm too wide, as if someone had pressed from the other side and left cold where skin should. At 1:10, the humming picked up a beat, like a song with a new drummer. The sign above the machine glowed, not with light, but with attention, a rule remembered by the rule itself. Do not use after midnight. The paper cup jammed and the chute shivered and fell to the floor, slush slopping out in a slow spill that walked itself into the carpet. The spill split around my shoes like a stream, learning manners. The machine burped the key card for 108, my door, my room, my place in this story I should have declined. Point of no return is not always a door. Sometimes it is a lever. I stood in front of the machine and placed my hand on the dispenser. The cold seared in a soft way, like dry ice, training my nails to misbehave. I thought of my appointment at dawn, of the mortgage payment teetering, of my sister's car. I thought of being the kind of person who leaves things alone. I pressed the lever and leaned in, because some nights reward bravery less than obedience. The chute opened its mouth to me like a secret told in a dare. Inside, the darkness felt thick, not vision, more like a texture. I slipped my fingers past the plastic lip, then deeper, expecting blades, or an auger, expecting mechanics. My fingertips brushed something that was not metal. It was cool and damp and pliant, like a tongue learning manners. It flexed, then pressed up into my palm, curious and affectionate. A voice whispered very close to my wrist, not words yet, more like someone shaping breath to fit my name. I pulled back and the machine made a small, impatient noise, the way a cat chirps when you stop petting it. Immediate consequence. My hand went numb past the knuckles, frost blooming and fine, lace along my skin as if drawn by a delicate pencil. Delayed echo. The cube in my bucket began to fog the lid in slow pulses 5 seconds apart, each pulse syncing with the soft thud in my chest like an invitation. The machine dispensed one last offering, small and careful. A plastic ring from a bottle cap, snapped, rhymed with frost, followed by a Motel pen I had not lost, followed by a folded square of paper that stuck to the chute until I peeled it away. The paper was from the guest book, names in blue pen, check-in dates. No chicos. Under my name, someone had written ice in a tiny neat hand. The letters bled as I warmed the paper. The corridor lights dimmed, then steadied, as if the building had paused to listen. When the next breath came, it slipped out of the chute and ran up my wrist, cool and mineral, smelling like pennies and snow. "Do you have ice?" it asked in clear whisper now, and the voice was my own, slightly wrong, as if recorded inside a throat. I ran, not far, the end of the hall far, the clerk far. She stood at the desk with both hands on the counter as if holding the building steady. I told her what I'd done, not all of it, just enough to hear it out loud. She did not look up. She said that is why the sign is there. She said after midnight, it is hungry and polite. She said it will take whatever you offer, and in the morning it will give back something that proves you never really left. She said most people do not reach in. She did not congratulate me for my restraint. I asked what it gives back. She said little things, a tooth, a ring, a pen, names written on paper by the wrong hand, enough to nudge you into believing you belong to it. She said the hotel owner removed the fuse and water line, but the machine never used those. She added, very softly, that the trail you see is from the ones who come back through. She looked at my hand and flinched before she could stop. Frost traced my palm in fine veins, a map to a place I had already visited. The clock on her desk clicked to 1:40. She said if you leave before 4, it is quieter. She said do not take ice. She said do not answer any voices in the hall. She handed me a small towel warmed in a dryer. It smelled like clean cotton and mercy. I wrapped my hand and felt pain return beneath the numbness, pins and needles like rain learning the size of the roof. My bucket lid thumped in my room down the hall. The machine hummed like a lullaby that does not care if you sleep. I made my last mistake because I'm stubborn. I wanted proof for my rational brain, a souvenir it could hold like a bad penny. I walked back and lifted the bucket lid. The single cube had split in two, not melted, split like a seed. Thin threads of frost linked the halves, pulsing faintly, drawing breath the way a mollusk draws tide. I dropped the guestbook scrap in with it and closed the lid. The cube fogged it in slow heartbeats until the paper blurred and bled. When I opened the lid again, the word ice had become a shape that looked like my initials, and I did not tell it that was not my name. I checked out at 3:55 because courage lasts in little sprints. The clerk slid the receipt across without comment. The sign on the wall that said, "No refunds," watched me as if it had learned to read. Outside, the rain had returned to wet the world clean. I loaded my bag. The ice bucket sat in the passenger seat because I forgot it was there, or because a part of me did not. The cube inside exhaled once more, fogging the lid with a sound like a thinking breath, and the frost on my palm tingled in reply like a line connecting two quiet rooms. On the highway, the dash clock froze for a minute at 4:04, then hurried to catch up. I told myself I had reached into a stupid machine and my nerves were writing fan fiction. I told myself the coins and tooth were a prank. I told myself the voice had been old air moving through plastic. The towel warmed my hand and took the ache with it. I drove until sunrise found me and made everything look possible again, which is the best trick morning knows. Hours later, in a safe town with a busy diner and a gas station where the pump screen smiled, I found a different motel that looked like it had never heard a ghost story. I checked in at noon, even though sleep would betray my job. The room was clean in a way that makes you suspicious. No fri, no maikrewa. In the corner sat an ice bucket, stainless steel, towel folded like a napkin across the top, scoop gleaming. I told myself every room has one. I lifted the lid anyway because this is my flaw. Inside, a neat scoop of wet cubes waited as if housekeeping had prepped a drink for a guest who had not arrived. The cubes fogged the air once, together in a tiny chorus. The bucket metal rang softly, like someone tapping a spoon from far away, polite and impossible. I closed the lid and did not open it again. Not in that room. Not that afternoon when I tried a nap. Not that night when I dreamed I was leaning over a well and a cool breath rose to meet mine and we both smiled. I have one thread I cannot tie for you. When I emptied the glove box later, the guest book scrap was gone, but a damp folded paper sat in its place. It was a room service menu from a motel that does not offer room service. The only item circled was ice, written in a hand that looked like mine if I were trying to reassure a child. Every so often my palm chills for a second, even on hot days, and a fog blooms on my car window in a shape that could be a mouth or a mirror. I do not wipe it away. I let it breathe and fade. Now we move to the last story for tonight. The hour when checkout does not mean what you... Story 5. Checkout is at 3:03 a.m. The clocks started telling the same lie the moment I turned on the bedside lamp. Each one blinking 3:03 like a red pupil in the dark. And if you have ever watched numbers look back at you, you know how quickly time stops being a friend and starts being a room with a locked door. I was on my last chance with a contract that could keep me afloat through winter. Missed the morning walkthrough, and I would drown in bills that do not care how hard you try. The motel was a low island of light in a field of black pines, the kind of place where the ice bucket is cleaner than the curtains, and the front desk bell gleams with a film of other people's fingerprints. I told myself I would sleep, wake early, leave quietly, and never think about this place again. The clerk slid a paper across the counter. House rules. Checkout is final in tiny print that wanted to be ignored. When I asked what that meant, she smiled like a person who had deleted 100 answers and let the cursor blink. The bell on the desk rang by itself. Just once, a bright note that startled us both. She said it does that sometimes when the night is thin. I told myself it was C, vibration, and I signed my name with the careful penmanship of someone who needs good luck from ink. Room 204 smelled like lemon, trying to cover something older. The alarm clock on the nightstand flashed 3:03, plugged into nothing. The TV menu read 3:03 at the corner, even though the show listing said 11:18. My phone's lock screen twitched, thought about showing the real time, then blinked to 3:03 and stayed there like a hell breath. The hallway clock mounted over the ice machine showed the same, a red digital colon pulsing. I told myself somebody had fun with a universal remote, and I set my watch by feel. Before danger, there was a small kindness. A folded card on the dresser said welcome, handwritten, and beneath it a note typed in all caps. Quiet hours 12 to 4. No late checkouts. Checkout is final. A laugh because the motel was half empty. Who did they expect to keep past noon? Then the bell at the front desk rang again, muffled through the walls, and the hallway light answered with a brief flicker, as if electricity had manners here. I watch people. It is how I anchor myself. A woman in scrubs smoked by the soda machine and checked her phone like it owed her something. A man with a beard rolled a suitcase down the hall, paused by his door, then rolled on without unlocking, as if he had forgotten where he belonged. A family ate chips in their car, with the engine off, faces blue in the dash glow. While I looked back at my phone, the calendar app would not open. The digits 3:03 floated at the top bar and refused to share space. The first wrong thing came quiet. The guest book in the office lay open as if waiting. I have been in these places enough to know the entries are usually complaints about towels and notes about nice staff. This one had a column for checkout time, handwritten, each line the same. 3:03 nachts. The clerk caught me staring and turned the book around with a practiced smile. She said we like to keep traditions. I nodded like I understood, because people love when you allow their strangeness to stay tidy. I try to anchor myself to normal. Shower. Lay clothes out. Check door chain. Kill the lamp, then bring it back because darkness felt like it wanted to try something. The numbers in the room kept time with one another like a choir learning a hymn. 303 on the TV. 303 on the microwave I did not plan to use. 303 reflected upside down in the rain on the window glass. Somewhere near the lobby, the bell gave a testing tap, like a spoon on a glass at the start of a speech you do not want to hear. At 12:27 by my analog watch, the hallway woke up. Doors opened, not all at once, but in a slow page turn. People stepped out with suitcases, each one rolling softly, wheels whispering a syllable that could have been go. They walked like sleepwalkers, polite and careful, eyes down, as if taking instructions from the carpet. When a door closed behind one man, he did not reappear at the far end. The hall did not echo him. The bell rang once, the way a hospital monitors a heartbeat, and the number 303 brightened on the wall clock. I knocked on a door near mine because authentication helps. The woman in scrubs opened a crack, smoke curling. She looked like she had been awake for 12 hours and still owed the night 3 more. I asked if she had noticed the clocks. She said yes without interest, like someone who has seen worse. She said, "Do not be in your room at 3. She said it like a superstition shared in a break room. I asked why. She started to answer, then stopped and rubbed her forehead as if the word had slipped away. The bell rang again. She shut the door like a reflex. Dread loops are patient. I called the front desk to ask for a wake-up call. The clerk said, of course, and asked for my desired time. I said 2:50. She said, "We do not do those." I waited for the smile in her voice. It did not come. She said, "The bell will wake you." I said, "That is not the time I asked for." She said, "The bell wakes everyone at 3:03. She lowered her voice and added that if I needed to leave early, I should be in the lobby before the hour. Then the line clicked, not hung up, only reminded of a rule. I tried to leave then. I grabbed my keys and bag and opened the door to the hall. The carpet smelled like a cold laundromat. The elevator blinked 303 on the digital panel, ignoring the floor numbers. The down arrow lit, then stayed lit without movement. The stairwell door was locked with a latch that should not exist. I tugged. It held. Something on the other side dragged once, a polite reminder that the building had ideas. When I returned to my room, the TV had turned itself onto a channel that showed the front desk bell in close-up, waiting. Some things seem ridiculous until they do not. I set 3 alarms on my watch, 10 minutes apart, and put the watch on my ankle so I would feel it. I propped the chair under the door handle. I sat on the bed and watched the digits breathe. The air felt tight, like a room that has been closed all summer. Every few minutes the bell rang once, and in the next room someone zipped a suitcase without urgency, a sound that felt like a sermon winding down. The second disturbance was subtle. The front desk bell stopped ringing, and the silence that followed made the vents loud. The house rules card on my dresser had new ink on it, the tiniest note in the margin. Checkout is final. The words looked like they had been printed that way since the card was born, but I had read it twice already. My watch buzzed once against my ankle and then went dead. The analog hand stopped between numbers, not on them, like a driver who cannot quite choose a lane. I looked through the peephole to prove I still lived in a world where observation mattered. The hall was empty. The exit sign at the far end glowed a nervous green. In the middle of the carpet sat a single suitcase, upright, handle extended, no owner, the little luggage tag blank. It rolled 2 inches toward my door and stopped without help, as if it had remembered something. When I opened the door, it was farther away again, near the elevator that did not move, facing me like a polite animal. At 2:40 by the analog wall clock in the lobby, 3 families stood near the coffee machine, trying not to look at the bell. One man had a receipt crumpled in his fist with 3:03 printed on it as the checkout time, even though we were not there yet. He said the printer had not been working earlier, and now it would not stop printing. The clerk nodded and kept her hands on the counter, as if the building might tilt. The guest book had been closed, and a key lay on top of it to keep it that way. Escalation came in 3 beats. First, the bell rang twice in quick succession, and every door on the second floor opened a hand width, as if the rooms were practicing breath. Second, The power dimmed without cutting, and the TV in my room showed a black and white view of the hall from a camera that did not exist. Third, the front doors to the lobby unlocked and slid wide though no one stood near them. A little theatrical flourish that made the night look generous and dangerous in the same blink. Isolation is not empty air. It is being surrounded by people who cannot help. The clerk said she cannot walk us out. She said she could hold the bell down with her palm for exactly 1 minute and no more. She pressed it, and the tones stretched into a solid note that made my teeth feel loose. The glass of the lobby door trembled. Somewhere a lock clicked. The minute ended like a rope cut clean, and the bell fell silent with relief. We all stood there pretending we had intended to do nothing. Revelation likes to arrive in paperwork. I lifted the key from the guest book and opened to the newest page. Names in different hands. Check-in dates neatly aligned. Checkout time written before each name by the same pen. 3 Uhr 3 nachts. No other time existed in the column. Not noon. Not 11. Not late. A small asterisk at the bottom read in small print. Checkout is final. A bell tone printed faintly below the line. A sound in ink, ridiculous and chilling at once. The clerk saw me reading and folded the book shut with a firm kindness. I wanted a clean red herring and found one. Fire code requires a test of alarms. Night staff sometimes run them late. Doors unlock and relock. Bells ring. Receipts glitch. I fed myself this theory as if it had calories. The detail that broke, it was the woman in scrubs. She walked past me toward the stairs with her bag and put her palm to the door. It opened for her without a latch, without complaint. She looked back at me with eyes that wanted me to follow. I took a step. The door swung shut. When I reached it, it was locked again, smooth and final. Point of no return arrived at 2:56 when the clerk said quietly that I should choose. Lobby now or room now. She said the building is fair in that one way. If you choose lobby, you leave. If you choose room, you see. I asked, see what? She said check out. She said it without drama, like a nurse who knows which needle will hurt less. I chose room because a part of me wanted the truth, and another part of me does not believe in fair. The bell rang once as if it had heard me and approved. I went back upstairs through the hall of cracked ice music and rolling wheels. The suitcase that had watched my door was gone. My room was colder than it had been, like Hotel C had learned a new number. The TV had turned itself to a channel that showed the bed from above. I stood in that picture of myself and waved and saw the delay. The alarm clock blinked brighter. My phone screen woke on a nightstand and displayed only 2 digits, 03. The colon flashed once, not twice, a heartbeat that belonged to someone else. I sat on the bed because standing felt like a decision I could not sustain. The building inhaled. The vent stopped. The numbers in the room brightened and then dimmed to a soft red that reminded me of an exit sign looked at too long. The bell rang. One clear note. Every door in the hall closed with a soft click that arrived through the walls like hail on distant water. The TV showed the door to my room closing by itself, and when I looked, it was already shut. The chain slid across with a tiny scrape I did not make. The hour turned without the help of any clock. I felt in my teeth and in the little hollow above my heart. The red digits held, 303, my ears filled with the thin pressure of a plane descending. The bed took on a weight that did not belong to me. The bathroom mirror fogged and cleared, words I could not read pressed from the wrong side. The suitcase I had not packed stood by the desk with its handle up, a courtesy to a traveler I did not plan on being. The bell rang. Not from the lobby, from a nightstand. Checkout is not leaving. That was the twist, and I knew it as the room leaned. The floor did not move. The angles did. The door was suddenly a mouth and the hall beyond a throat. The air tasted like cold linen. Every surface had the feeling of a palm pressed to it from the other side. Something tugged at my chest with a polite steadiness, as if asking me to stand. I stayed seated the way you brace against a wave. The room made a disappointed sound like a zipper stopped by fabric. Immediate consequence. The TV picture went black and showed only my name in white letters arranged like a reservation. Delayed echo. The receipt printer in the lobby whined and began to spit paper that curled and fell. Each line of name I had seen in the guest book, each with checked out, 3:03 a.m. and a blank space where a signature belongs. The clerk shouted something I could not hear and slammed a drawer. The bell on my nightstand rang, a little ring like a child trying to help. I spoke to the room because if you can name a thing, sometimes you can delay it. I said I am not checking out. The red digits pulsed once, then twice. Not a yes, not a no, only acknowledgement. The tug of my chest eased, then returned firmer. The bathroom door swung inward and showed me my reflection with my eyes slightly delayed from my mouth, as if all of me could not leave at once. I remembered the woman in scrubs saying, "Do not be in your room at 3, and I felt foolish and loved and punished all at once. I made my choice inside the choice. The window latch had been painted shut when the building last pretended to be new, but paint has a patient enemy. I levered the catch with my key and cracked the paint enough to let a wet breath in. It smelled like pines and aluminum. I climbed onto the dresser, pushed the sash higher, and put one leg through. The room pulled at me like a child who wants your attention now, but the outside pulled too, cool and blank and honest. I left the suitcase standing, an act of small rebellion that felt like a prayer. I slid out and caught the sill with cold hands. The night air punched me with relief. Below, gravel waited to collect my lack of grace. Behind me, the bell on the nightstand rang a last bright note, and the numbers in the room bloomed red as a wound before fading to a gentle heartbeat light. The tug of my chest loosened. The building exhaled in a shudder I felt through my palms. I dropped, landed badly, and lay still until the sky decided to stay where it was. A second-floor window sealed itself with the sound of a breath held. I walked to the office with my knees arguing and my heart counting strange. The clerk stood behind the desk with paper draped around her like snow, receipts shoulder high, all of them printed with the same time. She looked at me like I was the first wrong thing that had happened in a long time. She said the bell is stubborn. She said you were supposed to be done. She said, softly, that the building does not like debts. I asked what checkout is final means. She said it means what it says. She said it means what you think. She tore a receipt from the stream without looking and slid it to me. Checked out, 3:03 a.m. My name. A signature I did not recognize that looked uncomfortably like my hand. I said I'm still here. She said I know. She said it like a person who has learned there are two kinds of here. She stamped the paper with a small rubber block that said paid, and the noise was a little bell all its own. The front door unlocked with a sigh that sounded like someone had convinced it of something. I left without looking back because I'm not brave enough to watch myself disappear if that is what was going to happen. The parking lot had the gleam of a place that expects rain. The car unlocked for me with relief. The dashboard clock blinked 3:03 and refused to change until I crossed the highway and the motel shrank to a square of light. When it finally ticked forward, the sound was audible, a small plastic click that made me think of a mouth closing. I drove until the pines thinned and the road forgot how black it had been. A truck stop welcomed me with the lunch lights already on. I checked into a new hotel because I wanted a new story to tell myself. The clerk there wore a tie covered in cartoon coffee cups and asked if I needed a late checkout. I almost laughed. I said noon would be perfect. He printed a receipt by habit and slid it to me face down. I turned it over and felt the skin on my arms rise. Checked out, 3:03 a.m. The printer had decided like a reflex. The clerk frowned as if his machine had told a bad joke. He tore the paper in half and fed the pieces into a small trash bin with a soft apology. He printed a new one that behaved. He did not notice that the front desk bell on his counter gave a tiny ring when he tore the old paper, a bright note no one commented on. The bell rang again, softer, the way a memory taps your shoulder when you lie to it, and it decides to let you go for now. I slept with the window open to let real air keep me honest. At 3:03, I woke without the help of any clock. The room felt normal. The bell on the desk downstairs did not ring loud enough to hear. The numbers on the microwave remained shy. In the streak of condensation on the window, a finger had drawn a small circle and a colon and 2 digits. 303, imperfect and human, as if someone had copied the idea without believing in it. I wiped it away with my sleeve, and it came back faint, not offended. If you're listening and you ever stop at a place with a bell that rings by itself, you will know whether to sleep in the lobby or keep the window open or leave your suitcase empty. I cannot tell you rules, only rhythms. I can tell you the guest book from the first motel turned up folded in my glove box a week later, even though I never took it. My name is still there with a line through it, as if someone tried to check me out and the paper refused. Sometimes a receipt prints in my dreams, and I sign a name that is mine and not mine. I do not go back to that motel. I pass the exit and pretend not to read the sign. Some nights the numbers on my microwave skip to 303 and hold for a breath like a wink. Some nights I hear a small bell when no counter is nearby. Some nights I wake at 303 and find my suitcase standing by the door with the handle up, patient and polite. I set it back down and say not yet, and the house settles around me like a body remembering which side it likes to sleep on. That is the truth I brought back for you. Check out is a verb some buildings learn and practice. Sometimes the bell is polite, and sometimes it is not. Sometimes leaving is not leaving. If you ever see 303 blinking at you from every corner, think about where you want to be when the building inhales. Think about whether the window will listen. Think about whether the bell sounds like your name. That's all for tonight. 5 motel stories you'll never look at the word vacancy the same way again. If you've ever stayed somewhere that felt wrong, you know how quickly 4 walls can turn into a trap. Which story kept you awake the most? The room that knocked back, the vacancy sign that spoke, the manager who never blinked, the ice machine at the end of the hall, or check out at 303. Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your theories. If you enjoyed this, please leave a like. It helps more than you know. And subscribe for more nights like this. Until next time, sleep lightly, and don't forget to check the clock before you close your eyes.